Today, we're going to tackle the entire history of Austria. We're talking about a nation that for centuries was literally the heart of Europe. We'll see how this small frontier land managed to build a global empire, and then how it had to pick up the pieces and start all over again. So here's the big question for today. How on earth did Austria pull this off? How did it rise so high, fall so far, and then completely reinvent itself? It's an incredible story of power, marriage, war, and identity. A story that didn't just shape one nation, but really, the entire continent.
Okay, so to really get the empire, we have to rewind. We're going way, way back to its earliest days, to the ancient cultures and medieval families that laid all the groundwork. Now, the land we call Austria has some seriously deep roots. I mean, we're talking about the Celtic Hallstatt culture more than 2,500 years ago. Then, for centuries, it was just another part of the Roman Empire. But the story of Austria as we kind of know it, well, that really kicks off in 976 AD with a dynasty called the Babenbergs. You know, the name Austria itself tells you so much about its origins. The first time we see anything like it is in a document from 996 AD where it's called Österreich, which basically means the Eastern Realm. And that wasn't just a name, it was a job description. It was the eastern edge of the Holy Roman Empire, a military buffer zone. This idea of being on the frontier, that is absolutely key to understanding Austria. So the Babenberg family eventually died out, and things got pretty chaotic for a while. And then comes the single most important moment in Austrian history. In 1278, a guy named Rudolf of Habsburg, who was, a relatively minor noble at the time, he defeats the super powerful King of Bohemia and snatches up the territory. And with that one victory, the Habsburgs were in, and they would stay in power for over 600 years.
So how did the Habsburgs do it? How did they turn this little duchy into a world power? Well, it wasn't mainly through fighting. Nope. They had a much smarter and, frankly, much safer strategy. This Latin phrase right here was basically the unofficial motto for the whole Habsburg dynasty, and it just perfectly sums up their genius. Let others wage war, you, happy Austria, marry. I mean, why risk losing everything on a battlefield when you can gain a kingdom with a wedding ring? The formula they used was so simple, it was brilliant. Step 1, you scout all the royal courts of Europe for the most valuable single princes and princesses. Step 2, you arrange a strategic marriage. And then, step 3, you just wait. Through inheritance, entire kingdoms would just fall right into your lap. It was like playing geopolitical chess, but over generations. And the results? They were absolutely staggering. Through a few incredibly clever marriages, the Habsburgs picked up the wealthy lands of Burgundy and the Netherlands. Then, the next generation married into the Spanish royal family, and suddenly, they didn't just control Spain, but its entire global empire in the Americas and Asia too, all built on wedding vows. Of course, ruling a massive globe-spanning empire was anything but easy. The Habsburgs very quickly found themselves playing defense, protecting their new lands from powerful enemies on all sides. For hundreds of years, Austria's main job was being the shield of Christian Europe against the incredibly powerful Ottoman Empire pushing from the east. This epic rivalry all came to a head at the legendary Siege of Vienna in 1683. A huge international army finally showed up and broke the siege, stopping the Ottoman advance into Central Europe for good. It was a battle that really did change the course of history.
But while they were fighting this huge enemy at the gates, an even bigger threat was starting right at home: the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's challenge to the Catholic Church, the Habsburgs' own faith, just tore the Holy Roman Empire apart and plunged Europe into the absolutely horrific 30 Years' War. And as if that wasn't enough, a tough new rival popped up to the north, Prussia. This disciplined, militaristic kingdom under Frederick the Great directly challenged Austria's leadership over all the German states. This whole rivalry was perfectly embodied by two amazing rulers, Frederick and Austria's own formidable Empress Maria Theresa, who was a brilliant reformer and fought tooth and nail to hold her empire together.
All right, so now we enter the 19th century, and this really marks the beginning of a long, slow, painful decline. Powerful new ideas were bubbling up, and they were starting to tear the old empire apart from the inside. The big shockwave came out of France. Napoleon Bonaparte's conquests just completely shattered the old order of Europe. And in 1806, under pressure from Napoleon, the Holy Roman Empire, which had existed for 1,000 years, was simply dissolved, gone. In its place, the emperor declared a new entity, the Austrian Empire.
So, what did this new empire actually look like? Well, its greatest weakness is right here in the numbers. The German-speaking Austrians who were running the show, they made up less than a quarter of the population. They were a minority ruling over this patchwork of Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, Croats, you name it. And every one of these groups had its own language, its own culture, and a growing desire to rule themselves. This was a total powder keg.
The pressure from all this nationalism just became unstoppable. In 1867, they tried a big compromise, the Ausgleich, which basically gave the Hungarians equal status and created the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. But that just made all the other ethnic groups even angrier. The final spark, as we all know, came in 1914 in Sarajevo, with the assassination of the heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That lit the fuse for World War I. 4 years later, defeated and broken, the empire was just gone.
So, from the ashes of this huge empire, a tiny new country had to be built. A nation that was forced to find a totally new identity for itself in a pretty hostile world.
The first attempt, what they call the First Republic, was pretty much a disaster. It was this small German-speaking leftover state. It was economically crippled, politically a mess. It was only after the horror of a Second World War that the Second Republic was born. And that's the stable, prosperous, and fiercely independent Austria that we know today. But between those two republics lies Austria's darkest hour. In 1938, the Austrian-born Adolf Hitler annexed his own homeland into Nazi Germany. This was the Anschluss, or the Union. For 7 years, Austria simply ceased to exist as an independent country, and that national trauma absolutely shapes its identity to this very day. The modern Austria we know was really forged after the war. Full independence was finally restored in 1955, but on one huge condition: a constitutional promise to be permanently neutral. That policy, along with joining the EU in 1995, has allowed Austria to become this trusted diplomatic hub, a sort of prosperous bridge between East and West. So we end up right back where we started. Austria's entire history is this incredible cycle of reinvention, from a frontier outpost to a global empire, from a multi-ethnic superstate to a small republic. Its story is really the story of Europe's own turbulent journey in miniature, which leaves us with one last thought. In a world facing all new challenges, what will Austria's next reinvention look like?